All right, so good morning, everyone. Good afternoon in Vietnam, and welcome in this second session of the GEM Vietnam webinar series. So my name is Etienne Espagne, and I'm a senior economist at the French Agency of Development, in charge of this GEM Vietnam project. And today we welcome two scientists, specialists in the Mekong Delta, Dr. Philipp Minderhoud and Dr. Sepehr Eslami, and they will talk to us about the subsidence dynamics and salinity intrusion dynamics in the Mekong Delta. This is a work they have been working for a long time already, and they have been kind to share key results, new results of their work in the special COP26 report that our project has been handed out for COP26 in Glasgow just a few months ago. So this is based on the chapter 9 of this report. So Philipp and Sepehr, you will have 30 minutes more or less to present, and then we also welcome two distinguished discussants, so Professor Quan Hong Nguyen from ICET and Professor Alexis Drogoul from IRD for 30 minutes more of discussions, and yeah, progressively we will just open also the debate to all participants. So I guess I gave all the information. So Philipp, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Etienne, for this introduction and also for this general opportunity to share our research here with you today. So in the first part, I will talk about land subsidence, and then my colleague Sepehr will take over and talk about the sedimentation dynamics. I hope you can all see the screen. And
yes,
also see it flip. Great. So again, this is what Etienne already introduced to you, this the structure of this 1.5 hours webinar. So before we dive into scientific figures and facts and those things, I'd like to share these beautiful pictures with you. These are all panoramas taken in the Mekong Delta in different places in the Delta. And as you can see, it is really beautiful. A lot of nature left. Of course, these are panoramas taken in these natural areas specifically. And two things that are quite striking. I mean, in almost all the pictures, you see a lot of water, and you see the water very close to the surface of the land. And the second thing is that it is very flat. You can really look as far as the horizon in almost all these pictures, and that is really makes it also really a beautiful view, but it's also a striking geomorphologic feature. So to start on the same level, what is a delta? So the most basic description of a delta is when a river enters a body of water and it deposits sand and mud and other materials, it can create new land, and this new land is what we call a delta. So the Mekong Delta is the third largest delta that we have on our planet. So it's a very big one. It's located at the end of the Mekong River. I think I can have the, sorry for that. So it's located at the end of the Mekong River, and it created this large delta into the ocean. It is crucial to Vietnam's food production, and it is densely populated, both inside of the delta and in the adjacent Ho Chi Minh City. And as we saw on the pictures before, it is very flat and also very lowly elevated with respect to sea level. And the average elevation of the delta plain is actually less than 1 meter above mean sea level. And this has very large implications, as you can imagine, because small changes in vertical elevation can have large consequences for large pieces of land. And we see that on the right-hand side here in this animation where we have sea level rising with respect to the land level, and we see the amount of land that falls below this mean sea level. So a lot of changes happened in the Mekong Delta, but also in other deltas around the world. So here we see a natural landscape of a delta. And then when humans started using and occupying this delta, they started to change, there we go. They started to change the land use and convert it to, for example, agricultural fields, building cities and growing cities, and also using the natural resources such as groundwater. Also in the upstream domain, there's been a lot of changes. For example, the building of hydropower plants, which blocks the flow of sediment and water to the delta and really changes these dynamics quite drastically. And then inside the river itself, also the mining of sand, which changes the whole geomorphological shape of these riverbeds. And on top of that, as you all know, we have a rapidly changing climate these days. So this causes a number of challenges in deltas like the Mekong Delta. For example, there's more and more flooding happening, salinization from the seaside, coastal flooding, coastal erosion, saltwater intrusion also in the subsurface. And when you over-extract, for example, fresh groundwater, it can create upcouling of salt water. And as a result of global warming, we have rising sea levels. And for the Mekong Delta, this number lies between 3 to 5 millimeters per year at present. And then these deltas themselves are not stable either. So the delta surface can also sink. And then this is what we call land subsidence. And the rates of land subsidence at present, they have been measured up to rates of 60 millimeters per year. So these two combined, sea level rise and land subsidence, it is what we call relative sea level rise. So this is the sea level rise experienced by the land when you stand at the coastline. So here we see data measured from satellite. This is a vertical movement in the delta from the time period of 2014 to 2019. And as you can see, this is quite giving a very nice, I would say, overview of vertical movements in this delta. We see stable points around the bedrocks in the northwest of the delta, where there's hard rock close or at the surface. Oh, I'm sorry. Oops. Let me restart. There we go. And then furthermore to the coast, we see land subsidence rates when we go into this red area, really distinct, going up to very high rates of several centimeters per year. So there's two key messages here, that land subsidence is much higher than sea level rise, and it affects almost the entire delta. Please be aware that this data here is publicly available. So if you want to use it or go through the details, you can actually download it yourself and work with it. So if we look to evidence of subsidence in the delta, we can see a lot of these kind of features. So cracks on bridge hedges, the ramps when you go up to these foundations, houses that have sunk below local water level, and then new houses have been built next to these older abandoned houses. And when you find groundwater wells that have deep foundations, it can be up to several hundreds of meters, you can really see the sinking of the delta surface. For example, on this groundwater well here on the right, this was the original delta surface, and this is now the delta surface at present. So what processes cause land subsidence in the delta? Let's list them. So first of all, it is a very natural process that happens in all deltas around the world. And there's several processes behind it. In the more shallow part, the unconsolidated sediments, we have natural compaction, which is simply the densification of sediment over time and with loading. So with addition of more sediments on top, which is heavy, it compresses the sediments below. And then we have what we see on the right-hand side here, these more deeply rooted Earth crust dynamics, such as faulting and tectonical movements and isostasy. These tend to be quite limited in speed. Then, of course, the loading can be increased by human activities and the construction of buildings on top of the delta surface, like infrastructure, buildings, etc. But also, if, for example, the surface water level is drained, this also increases the loading, simply because the water is no longer carrying the shallow sediments. And in addition, it can start other processes targeting the organic material in the subsurface, such as oxidation, when you have low surface water levels. And then when we go more to the in-depth part, the extraction of fluids, groundwater, gas, oil. As you can imagine, when fluid is extracted and not being replaced by something else, eventually you create a decrease in pressure, and a decrease in pressure can increase compaction. So together, all these different drivers and processes, they act at different depth scales and they amount to total land subsidence. So if you have a measure of total land subsidence, the challenge is first to break it down in where is it happening in depth, and then connect it to the different drivers. Whereas you are interested in one of the drivers, you have to go through the other way of this diagram. And this is the type of research that we've been focusing on in the last few years. Then what we know also from other deltas is that human-induced processes tend to cause much faster land subsidence rates than the natural processes. And also that subsidence can actually be highly variable, both in time and space. So there is really, in that sense, a four-dimensional puzzle here. So 3D in the surface, but also in time there's variability. So let's have a look to the natural compaction of the Holocene Mekong Delta. So this means the shallow part of this delta. So the Mekong Delta, like all the deltas in the world, is actually a very young landform. It's only been created in the last several thousands of years. 7,000 years ago, for example, the coastline was situated in present-day Cambodia. So this means there was no Mekong Delta at the time that the Egyptians were building their pyramids. So you can imagine that this new body of land that has been formed of several hundreds of kilometers, it's really geologically very young, as we call it. So when this delta was built, and it's about, the Holocene deposits have a thickness in this southern plain of Kamau, about 20 meters. It had a very rapid, let's say, progression, so building out into the sea. And when you have that, these sediments can actually compact under their own weight quite significantly. And there are measurements, for example, at the tip of Mui Kamau in the south of the delta, where several centimeters of compaction have been measured for these top 20 meters. And we actually confirmed with modeling that this is something that can indeed result from this rapid propagation of this delta, purely under natural conditions. It is quite extraordinary, and it's only, let's say, happening really at the coastline. But recently we created this map in which we make, let's say, a first estimate of maximum natural compaction rates for these Holocene clays based on clay thickness throughout the Holocene in this delta. And you can see that high rates of several centimeters per year can occur at these young coastlines. It is important to realize that this natural compaction is a process that cannot be stopped. So the sediments will continue to compact. And the only way actually to compensate for the elevation loss is to add new sediments on top of it. And this is what happens in healthy mangrove forests. They have these high rates of compaction, but they also trap sediments, so they're able to sustain their elevation. Let's have a look at the relation between land use and land subsidence. So when we overlay land use maps, land use change maps with space measured land subsidence rates, we actually found this relation. And I'll talk you through it. So on the top, we listed several human-induced drivers of subsidence related to land use classes. And you can see there's a general increase of human-induced subsidence drivers from the left to the right. So on the far end left, we see natural land uses such as marshland and wetland forest, and they have the lowest rates of land subsidence. Then we have agricultural classes which have a variation variation in the rates of land subsidence. And then we have the urban classes where there's a really high impact of human impact and also high rates of land subsidence. Well, we see this, let's say, outlier in this one. These are the mangroves at the coastline, and actually that is what explains their relatively high land subsidence rates, what we saw in the previous slide, because they are sitting on these young deposits, so they experience a lot of this natural compaction. So this is, we can actually explain this very well. So we see this increase with increasing human impact in the system. And one of these drivers is the extraction of groundwater that we see. So let's have a look at this land use and groundwater extraction. So in the Mekong Delta, there's a lot of agricultural practices going on and aqua farming, and we see examples here. And on top of that, there's an overall development in the Delta with increasing industrial and domestic exploitation of groundwater. And these different agricultural classes, they use different amounts of groundwater, also depending on the year and the availability of fresh surface water. So salinization weighs in to the amount of groundwater extracted for these different practices. And then if we look to the amount of groundwater extraction over the past decades, we see this tremendous increase in the data that is available, where the amount of extraction is, well, 5 times more than it was in the year 2000. So this water comes from the subsurface of the delta, and this is a stack of sand and clays, aquifers, Deltares as we call it, and it can be as thick as more than 500 meters if you are more in the coastal zone of this delta. So this is more than half a kilometer of unconsolidated sediments that can actually move and compress. And the water is being pumped from there. And what we see in the measurements, so those are measurements of water pressure, not water level, water pressure in these aquifers. We see that in the confined aquifers, so the ones that go more to depth, the deepest one is under 400 meters in this graph. We see this consistent decrease in water pressure. So that means that the aquifers are actually being overexploited. So more water is taken out of the aquifers than is flowing in through recharge. And when this happens, you actually create the following process, which is called aquifer system compaction. So water is taken out of the sandy layers, which not really respond and generally not really compact. But then what happens as a secondary process is that water is actually also being, let's say, drained from the softer deposits, so the clays. And when this water is excluded from these clays, they start to realign, and it means that they actually the volume that they take up is smaller, and this can happen at any depth in this aquifer system. And as a result, when you decrease the pressure and you have a lot of these clays, you actually create a lot of aquifer system compaction, which then results in land subsidence at the surface. So we created a model that could actually simulate this process for the entire delta. I'm not going into the details of this model, but there's a lot of work from geological to hydrogeological and geomechanical work in here. And we could simulate for the different aquifers in the delta at different depths what the amount of decreasing pressure is over time, so since 1990 until now. And if we then have on the left side here, we see the hydraulic head, so water pressure in one of these aquifers. On the right side, we see the land subsidence cumulative for the entire model. And we see that there's this drop in pressure, and it consequently results in an increasing amount of aquifer system compaction and land subsidies. So what we found with this study is that with the increase of groundwater extraction, I would say almost logically, we also find this a bit delayed, but very real increase of aquifer system compaction. So the speeds really increased towards, in this case, 2050. And later, when we had access to newer INSAR data that I showed you earlier, we actually see the same thing when we measure it from space, and they are consistent with what we saw earlier in the model. So in the time span of 10 years, we see this almost doubling of the more extreme rates in the delta, where we have these two INSAR data sets next to each other. And it also shows that the overexploitation of groundwater affects almost the entire delta at this moment. So the beauty of having such a model is that we can also use it to go into the future and try to make predictions of what may happen given certain scenarios. So a bit like the IPCC reports on sea level rise, but then on the land hand side. So that's what we did until the end of the century. We created these different scenarios of groundwater extraction, both non-mitigation and mitigation scenarios. And we calculated the effect on how much land subsidence rate would it create. And I'd like to highlight this one. This is the M4. So actually, all the extraction is set to zero from 2018. But as you can see, throughout the century, there is still ongoing compaction going on. It's much lower than when you sustain groundwater extraction, but it also shows you that it's a process that it has a delay in there. And this is because these clay beds, they drain slower than actually are in a one-on-one response to pumping. So stopping the pumping will not stop the process immediately, which I think is very relevant to understand. So let's have a look what the effect is on the elevation of the delta. Here we have these different scenarios and the average groundwater levels. And on the right side, we're going to project it on top of the elevation of the delta. So in the M3 scenario, in which we actually decrease the amount of groundwater extraction by 75% of the present day volume, this is the elevation of the delta towards, let's say, the end of this century. It also includes a moderate projection of sea level rise in here. And what we can see is, as soon as we see blue, it means that the level of this this part of the delta falls below mean sea level. It doesn't mean necessarily flooded, because you can use coastal protection structures, etc. But at least the elevation is below sea level. So we see an increase, but only towards the end of the century, it becomes really impacting large parts of the delta. When we follow the amount of stable extractions, so we keep the extractions of today stable throughout, let's say, the end of the century, this is the effect. So we see more and more elevation loss also earlier in the century. And then if we allow a moderate increase of the groundwater extraction, which is actually the current trajectory of where the delta is going. So it's only 2% increase per year, but eventually it creates quite a lot of extraction. Then we see really that even in several decades, large parts are already below sea level. And towards the end of the century, the majority of the delta will fall below sea level. So there's the key message here that actually the extraction of groundwater is not free. Although you may not pay taxes for it at the moment, but you pay with it with elevation and increased sedimentation. And I mean, once you're below sea level, the cost of living and protecting the land really exponentially increases. So there's even, let's say, economic impact at that stage. So let's talk a bit on the option, can we reinstate fluvial sedimentation to save the delta? There's more and more talk about, let's say, allowing reinstating sedimentation, allowing flooding of the delta to bring back sediments onto the delta. And this makes a lot of sense because this is the natural, let's say, way a healthy delta functions. On the other hand, there's a growing body of literature that actually shows that the amount of suspended sediment in the rivers is steeply declining, mainly because of upstream dams in the Mekong River system. So there's this conflict between actually these two facts. So this is the reason why we actually wanted to bring these together. And this is a paper that was published just 2 days back on Monday, in which we wanted to see from a natural process point of view, what is actually the potential if we add these different realms together. Basically answering the question, is there enough sediment to implement these kind of strategies all over the delta as is now being talked about? Well, in this figure on the left side, we see the pristine elevation change. So this is an elevation change balance, I would say. So in the pristine version, so the purple one is suspended sediment and organic sediment accumulation. We only have to account for natural compaction because in the pristine situation, we didn't have a significant sea level rise and there was no extraction-induced compaction. And you can see that in the gray area, in the gray bar, it is actually positive. So this is logical as well because this is why the delta could grow in the past. If we go then to the 2020 calculations, we actually add sea level rise in there, but also the extraction-induced subsidence that we just saw. And now we see that there's a high negative balance of elevation change. If we want to, let's say, share and put the sediments that is available on the entire delta area. And then in 2050, we actually see a growth of the error bar in the total in the gray area. And this is mainly resulted to the uncertainty related to human-induced land subsidence by groundwater extraction, because this is something that can be steered and depends on what happens in the next decades. And of course, we see this increase in sea level rise. So we then looked to smaller zones for sedimentation scenarios. And for this, I'd like to invite you to have a look on this paper if it's interesting to you. So briefly, some main findings. So there is actually by far not enough fluvial sediment available to compensate the high elevation loss if we look at it for the entire delta plain. It is very important that what little sediment is actually present in the system should really be treasured, and smart sedimentation strategies at the local scale, they can make a difference in offsetting the elevation loss. And something which we didn't anticipate, but it's quite interesting, is that actually organic sedimentation may promise, let's say, an addition to fluvial sediments in building elevation gain. Because it can actually create quite a lot of sediment. However, it does require a change of farming practices. For example, if we want to use the residue of rice, we have to change the way, instead of burning it, mulching it into the subsurface, and also change the way water is managed. So the organic sediments do not oxidate and let's say evaporate, break down. So before I finish off with the conclusions, I'd like to go to two sites very close to the delta, some neighboring countries. And this is an example I'd like to share from Bangkok. So Bangkok had their own land subsidence crisis, you can say, already almost 50 years back. It started. And then they started measuring, when they got aware that Bangkok was sinking, they started measuring groundwater levels and subsidence. And the red line here is subsidence going down, and then we see in these other lines we see the water levels of different aquifers under the city. And Bangkok implemented 3 policies to control over-exploitation of groundwater. So the first one was in 1977, then there was another one in 1983, and one in 1985, in which they actually started taxing putting a tax on the extraction of groundwater. And interestingly, when we see to this magnificent data running almost 50 years, we see that the stopping of groundwater overexploitation took 20 years since the first policy on groundwater protection. So there is quite a delay between the policy and the actual, let's say, stopping of overexploitation here. And stopping of subsidence, it took 30 years since this first policy. So this gives a bit of an idea how much time do we need to consider and take into account if we want to stop this type of land subsidence. And you can wonder, how does this compare to the Mekong Delta, where we have this Groundwater Act in Bangkok? Is that comparable to, for example, the Resolution 120? And the second thing I'd like to show you is, can a delta really sink below sea level? Because it sounds maybe very apocalyptic, right? Seeing this whole huge delta turning blue in these little figures. So here we have this Mekong Delta, and we've seen locally the rates go presently up to 6 centimeters per year of land subsidence. Well, if we go to the other side of the sea and we go to the Philippines, this is the Pampanga Delta, close to north of Manila, and it actually has similar types of land subsidence rates. And the village that we see here, it used to be a village living from agriculture about 20 years back. And as you can see now, it is permanently inundated, and people need to go to church by boats and try to sustain their traditions while having these water issues everywhere. And still this area is sinking 5 centimeters per year. So what you see here, that actually the actions that are taken today and that are taken at present, they do determine the fate of a delta tomorrow. And this is not to scare anyone, but this is to, let's say, prepare you that this is actually it's a potential future from a natural point of view. So to close off, key messages on land subsidence. We see that today accelerated land subsidence rates are much higher than sea level rise by climate change. Subsidence is partly caused by natural processes. It is unavoidable, but the majority of the human-induced land subsidence is caused by the overexploitation of groundwater, which is in a way avoidable. Unrestricted groundwater extraction can drown large parts of the delta, as we saw. So groundwater is not a free resource because you pay with your elevation. So one of the things could be to start really to value elevation in the delta as a precious resource and trying not to exploit it, because once you lose it, it's very hard to get it back. And effective strategies to reduce it are needed. Let's say it is time to have them urgently, because the elevation that the delta has above sea level is rapidly running out. So reducing groundwater extraction is the most effective way, as we saw in Bangkok, to slow down land subsidence. But it's also a huge challenge, because finding alternative water sources and really adapting the agro-agricultural system in the delta is really a big challenge. And then it's very important to adopt this inclusive delta system approach. So design mitigation and adaptation strategies that don't target one individual process, but really cross these processes, both from the natural system and the social economic system. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention, and we can continue to the part of Sepehr, which I hope has entered the meeting by now.
I'm here. Yes, I'm here.
Great. Okay, then I'll stop sharing my screen, and I gladly give the floor to
Thank you very much, Philip. Can everybody see the shared screen?
Yes, we can.
All right, great. A good afternoon and morning. Sepehr Eslami from Deltares and Utrecht University. Pleasure to be with you all. I'm going to look at the second part of this discussion, which is mainly on salt intrusion in the delta, which I have spent the last 6-7 years studying it. And with AFT, we did major work on the projections of salt intrusion in the delta. So with that, I would like to say that so the salt intrusion is key to land use in the Mekong Delta. And we more and more see reports of saline water intrusion if we are sitting outside Vietnam or Mekong Delta. And if you're in the Mekong Delta, you probably experience it. 2016, there was a historical event that surpassed anything that was experienced before that within the Delta. From a scientific point of view, in 2015, there was projections for sea level rise for the year 2050, which were exceeded by during the 2016 record salt intrusion. So within 1 year, those projections were exceeded for the year 2050. And how did that happen? That was indeed an important question to look into. And it even got worse. In 2020, this happened again, and the record of 2016 within 4 years was broken in the year 2020. So how did this happen? That is important to look into the historical trend and see what we find there. But for when I look at historical trends, I always I like to look into this anecdote. In 2019, there was a BBC documentary that related a lot of the observed trends in the Mekong Delta to climate change. At part of that documentary, there is a family that had to flee the Mekong Delta to Ho Chi Minh City because they lost their home due to landslide. And keep that in mind because it very much relates to the historical trends in the Mekong Delta. So that 7, 8 years before this documentary was released. If we look at the drivers of salt intrusion, very often the first thing that one would be suspicious to is actually freshwater supply and discharge. But if we look at fluvial discharge in the Mekong Delta over the last 30 years, in fact, this has been increasing. Yeah, so freshwater supply has consistently increased over the last 30, 35 years. But if we look at tides within the Mekong Delta, then suddenly, and if we look at the trends of, for instance, changes in the tides, we see quite a fluctuation in tidal amplitudes in the delta, in the blue line per year. And if we look at the trends, it's actually a changing trend. So this is the red line is the trends that has been observed in the offshore tides. And within the delta, suddenly there is a breakaway point around the year 28, 29 from that offshore trend, which cannot be explained by anything that is taking place outside the delta. And that coincides exactly with that 7, 8 years ago that the weather drastically changed and the perception of the local family that had to leave their home from the Mekong Delta. So that's interesting in that for us, that's the key to understanding what has been the drivers of salt intrusion in the delta. The changing tide is the key to understanding all of that. Climate change should be, it's a reduced term. It should be environmental change when we look at the Mekong Delta, because it's beyond just a global climate change. And the local drivers of change are actually significantly present. We showed this before in a research that if we look at it, salt intrusion, there is 3 millimeters per year of sea level rise. But if you look at relative sea level rise, as Philipp just gave the presentation, and include that land subsidence, this is a much higher contribution. but also there is sediment trapping by upstream dams and excessive sand mining in the lower Mekong countries, in the Mekong Delta, within the Mekong Delta, and also in Cambodia and Laos, that result in riverbed and riverbank erosion, and that leads to a significant increase in the tidal range within the Mekong Delta, as I showed in the previous figure, that there is this significant trend of 2 centimeters per year increase in the tidal amplitude and tidal range. And together, these riverbed and bank erosion and these changes in tide influence and increase salt intrusion. In fact, if we look at the sea level rise effect, sea level rise, actually the relative sea level rise effect over the last 20 years, we only look at 5 to 10% contribution to the experienced salt intrusion as of today. These changes in riverbeds have been also observed on multiple occasions. For instance, in some of these cross sections, as you see, between 2014 and 2017, there has been up to 5-6 meters of erosion observed in some of these cross sections. In fact, if we look at the 2016 historical event, this was the salinity that was observed, and so we had that in the model as well. If the riverbeds did not change over the last 20 years, the experienced salt intrusion would be much less, and in some places as much as 20 kilometers. So that tells you how much this riverbed level changes actually influence and amplify the problem within the delta. This was recently published last year in an article that is that's now available in open source, and we looked into the specifics of these current day changes, trends in the delta. But what do we know? What can we say, knowing whatever we know now? What can we say about the future? If we look at an integrated image of the delta, as integrated as it can be, if this is, for instance, a cross section of the delta through an estuary. We see the aquitard and aquifer level that forms delta, but also an estuarine system. You know that fresh water intrudes the estuary, and the salt balance is a competition between the river forces and sea. So it's it's river against the sea. But this is influenced by tides, but also by sea level, the sea level that is rising. But it can also be influenced by wind, it can be influenced by short waves, by ocean surge, as well as fluvial discharge, and evaporation and precipitation and their anomalies due to climate change, but also by human-induced activities such as water demand for agriculture, sediment impoundments, upstream impoundments, and the sediment starvation, sand mining, that together with the sediment shortage results in erosion, and eventually results in additional salt intrusion, but also by land subsidence, by groundwater extraction that results in land subsidence. This is not to be mixed with groundwater, saline water intrusion, which can also be caused by groundwater extraction. But yeah, so we look at this integrated image of the delta regarding how salt intrusion takes place. What we have learned over the last decade about the delta is that, okay, there's sea level rise due to climate change, there is rising tide within the delta, there is land subsidence of a few centimeters per year, there is erosion of 10 to 15 centimeters per year within this system. There is an increasing fluvial discharge, so that's a trend that is working against the salt intrusion, but also sediment shortage, and all that results in whatever we have seen in something in the order of 0.2 to 0.5 PSU per year. But if we combine these effects into scenarios with climate change scenarios, then we can come up with a relatively intriguing image that If we so these are scenarios of salt intrusion increase. So the darker the color, the more increase can be expected in the year until the year 2050, which is the policy perspective. So we can see, for instance, under only climate change, so basically only sea level rise and discharge anomalies, or climate change plus land subsidence. And for land subsidence, we used Philipp's projections of groundwater extraction and spatially varying land subsidence until 2050, and riverbed level changes, as has been observed, it can be predicted for the next 3 decades. And well, we can also show absolute, but maybe difficult to see in this image. The very bad scenarios, you can see it here. But if we translate this to increase in areas affected by salt intrusion, then we're talking about something in the order of 180,000 hectares of land affected only under climate change. That can increase with scenarios of land subsidence, extraction-induced land subsidence. But it can be significantly higher when we also include even moderate scenarios of riverbed level changes. That's how sensitive it is, the system, to riverbed level changes. And this, of course, can be even far more complicated if we add scenarios of extreme sea level rise. I mean, we see that already by accelerated sea level rise, this can significantly impact whatever that we can predict for the next 3 decades. So what does this mean? It means that in the short term, within 2 to 3 days, anthropogenic processes determine the fate of the delta. Beyond 2050, climate change and relative sea level rise will be the dominant factors. This translates to challenges and opportunities. The challenge is that some of these trends can be irreversible, or maybe irreversible is not the most accurate word, but it's very difficult to reverse. Theoretically, everything can be reversed, but there are also opportunities, as a lot of these trends are significantly amplified by human impact. The translation of this to for policy implication is as a complement to what Philipp just mentioned on the importance of elevation. I'd like to say that elevation above and below water is a natural asset in the system. And like Philipp put a price on elevation, I also say that the cost of sand is not its extraction and labor, but it's also the burden it places on the public's shoulder in river erosion, landslide, and massive and historical salt intrusion. So that starts from there with the policy implications. But also that means that mitigating groundwater extraction, sand mining, and reinstating flooding are part of any future strategy, are important and fundamental parts of any adaptation or mitigation strategy. Things that can have significant contribution are transformation of farming practices, as in technology, using more recent technology or approaches, but also, as Philipp was mentioning, any solution that is going to come up as a result of what the Delta is experiencing today should be something that in 20 to 30 years from now, we're not going to regret. And we're not just transferring the problem from one point to the other point, but it should be an integrated solution that looks into the system as a whole, in a system approach. I just, to wrap up, I have also, for instance, come up with some of the adaptation strategies that are currently taking place to give us some hope on the fact that actually things can be done. A lot of that is actually one of the biggest opportunities in the Delta is it's in seasonality. Look at the river discharge that is changing massively with the southwestern and the northeastern monsoon. The time period that salt intrusion is dominant is actually a relatively short period, because yes, we experience salt intrusion in this period, but the extreme salt intrusion is actually a shorter period. And that means that this is a very big problem over a short period of time. And if we even look at, for instance, what happened in 2016, and we can use models and also observations back that, if this was the maximum salt intrusion, you know, that we see that Kanto City is there, and we know that Kanto City nearly experienced salinity during 2016. But this was the absolute maximum. And actually 50% of the time, salinity was much lower, far from Kanto. So salt intrusion is indeed a big problem over a short period of time. But when it happens, it can create a lot of problems to the system. For example, some of the examples of that leverage this seasonality is integrated rice and shrimp model, which is not new in the Mekong Delta, but it can be modified to maximize flooding, because these farms, they actually have to be flooded in their cycle a couple of times. And if we make sure that we actually maximize this flooding, we can include what Philipp just mentioned. We can include, we can bring sediment to the system, be it fluvial sediment or organic sediment. We know that it can work. And with WWF, we're currently developing pilot projects for that, to actually see what is going to happen and how effective this could be in the farm level. Other examples of that in the farm level, because a lot of the delta is farms, is shallow aquifer storage and recovery. There's another pilot project going on that is storing water in just, creates a freshwater lens just below the land by pipelines during the wet season. And then in the times of shortage, when salinity is too high, in those periods, this can be leveraged and then can bridge the gap at that period. Or we can think of, for instance, deep aquifer storage, so hundreds of meters below the land level, bring the water to those aquifers and then extract them to bridge the gap in times of shortage. So there are also solutions and adaptation strategies, adaptation approaches, if we look at the picture as a whole, and if we look at it in an integrated manner. And these are some of the examples of that. I close my talk with the policy implications that I just touched upon. With that, I would like to thank for your attention. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Sepehr, and thank you also, Philipp. So you went well beyond 30 minutes, but it was so such good presentations, I think, that I didn't want to interrupt, right? Let me just introduce Marie-Noëlle Wallace, my colleague from IFD, climate scientist, and she will lead the discussion time. So Marie-Noëlle, if you're here.
I'm here. Yeah, thank you very much, Philipp and Sepehr, for this great presentation. So we have only quite a short time for discussion. So we will start with the panel discussion with first Hong Kwan Nguyen from the Institute for Circular Economic Development. Dr. Nguyen, are you on the floor?
Yes, Maria,
yeah.
Can you
so
hear me?
Please, yeah, we can hear you. So the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So how long minutes I have? Sorry, I don't know exactly. Mary, sorry.
Yeah.
How long I should have? Yeah.
Wait, yeah. Please go on.
Yeah. I just want to ask how long I should have can talk.
Oh, well, we can say 10 minutes. And after that, we will have the comment from Alexis Drogoul from IRD, and then we can save some 10-15 minutes for the questions from the rest of the audience.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I think, I just don't want to take a lot of time. Yeah, so first of all, thank you very much, Philipp, for inviting me to join the meeting, and Maria and Explains for giving me this opportunity. So yeah, I'm very happy that we have many people join the meetings, and I think the topic is really great. And actually, I have been also working with Philip and Sepehr and some others in this topic, but also a little bit further extending not only groundwater but also other topic, for example, with surface water, agriculture transformation, climate adaptations in the Mekong Delta. Yeah, so back to the topic today. I like to give maybe 3 points for further discussion. The first point is regarding the challenges that we are facing in the Mekong Delta, not only from the land subsidence, but on salinity intrusion. But I think we also need to look at a little bit broader perspective from these challenges. The second point I will share a bit is about the solution. I think we need to talk about solution. I think, yeah. And the last point, I think, just few reflection also on the further research regarding our the land subsidence to intrusion work here, but also maybe others. Yeah, first regarding the challenges, I think actually if you see from the point that Philipp and Sepehr already make, we see quite a complexities, and also it's basically the interaction between in the groundwater is already quite complex, but it's also links here also to the salinity intrusions and regarding land, sand minings and other. But there are also quite many other things that I think we cannot really yet included, especially look at the whole social ecological system complexities, where we see also the interaction between agriculture, urban developments, industry, including sand minings and others relating, for example, ecological impacts on diversities. Yeah. Yeah, of course, also we see quite already clear the impact of upstream developments, climate change, sea level rise. But I think we also have to take also the considerations on the very, I think, the economical developments, and especially the demanding for developing the Mekong Delta. This is very important driver for the local governments and local peoples. And yeah, and also I think the social issue need to be also considered, especially in terms of agriculture livelihoods and how it interact with groundwater use, and also other groundwater use, and also the cost of land subsidence. Yeah, so I think this whole complexity we need to look at it. Yeah, so I think in the chapter from Sepehr and Philipp, others, we have already rest for us, I think, some of that, but few points we can go very deep. Yeah, for example, the system, the modeling work, but many others I think we cannot yet just mentioned, but we cannot really integrate it, especially if we're looking at the modelings, the scenario development is still quite roughly in terms of complexity, but also in terms of solutions. Yeah, so that is the first point. And I think the second point I want to share is about the solution. I think we have to acknowledge a lot from international development groups and many others, and also strongly supported by the government about the development of the Mekong Delta, especially in the last 5 years. I think, and actually it's already started from the Mekong Delta plans in 2013, but it's also highlighted, especially in the resolution 120 by Prime Minister for climate resilience and sustainable development of the Mekong Delta. It is really a great directive for the development of the Mekong Delta. But implementing solution or implementing the resolution 120 is still quite a very challenging. Actually, we have been just recently, they are almost publishing a new articles on regional environmental change. We analyzed how the limitation of implementing the resolution 120 in Vietnam. Actually, we find a lot of challenges. So we have the directive, we have the visions, but implementation is still very far, especially if you look at the governance, institutional aspect, the linkage between central to local government, the cross different sectors. It is quite, I hope we can share with you soon, but we find very challenging. Yeah? And actually, if we're looking at the action plan already developed by different ministries, Ministry of Natural Resources, Environment, Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Investment and Planning, like the Mekong Delta Plan is almost in the final stage, but also Ministry of Industry and Trade and others. So, and also local governments, they all develop action plan towards the implementation of Resolution 120. But actually, it's very difficult to translate the idea of resilience, climate resilience, and sustainable development of the Resolution 120 into action plan. And if you look at very detailed in action plan, you see don't much, not really merge the solution which can capture the as we said, the soul of the Resolution 120. It's just again compare construction of the dye or sluice gate and some other, but how is how the resilience is really presented, we've identified that. And of course, there is also the challenging in, I already mentioned, of interprovincial or cross different sectors, especially from ministry to another ministries. So actually, also the good side that the government already set up the so-called national council for regional coordination. That is really good, chaired by the Vice Prime Minister. So we hope that I hope very much that the council can really make the integration cross sector and also cross different provinces. And also we see there are quite some activity, especially regarding agriculture adaptation and climate adaptation and agriculture transformation, especially in agriculture sectors. So I think the Ministry of Agriculture is also working very hard because towards the more resilience and action and climate adaptation to the in the Mekong Delta, and of course also Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment. But I think they are still more or less in again a bit upper level, but the action, the real action is still difficult. If we come back to the challenging that we are facing, or we are talking today on land subsidence and saline intrusion, we really need good solution for that. And of course, this need again, not only one ministry or one province can solve the problem. Is we need people from all different ministries and also different provinces to work together to find a solution for reducing land subsidence. But if you see, this is most likely now responsible by Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment. But you see, if we use groundwater for agriculture, we have to work with Ministry of Natural Resources, Agriculture and Rural Developments. If we talk about sand mining, we have to talk with the Ministry of Industry and Trade. Yeah. And also Ministry of Construction, where we need also the material for urban development activities. So this is really complicated. Yeah. So we know a problem, but actually solution is very challenging. And of course, we have to, there are quite a lot of activity is developing now in the Mekong Delta. Recently, the government announced about the in total of $2 billion for developing the Mekong Delta, especially in infrastructural developments and also other short solution. But actually, I think we still very hard to accept either solution are low or no. I think regret solution, because there are a lot of impacts could be coming if when the project is implemented. Actually, we also publish very soon another papers where we see the adaptation to saline intrusions under closed gate in the coastal area. So we see we need a lot of fresh water by developing sluice, yeah, to keep fresh water in the system. But actually, the people who living in the coastal area are not really well or really adaptive to the fresh water. They already familiar with saline water, for example, for shrimp farmings. But if with that, so I think actually the solution have to take a lot into account into the social system too. And of course, there are also, I think, also possible solution where we can look at as so-called integrated or multi-objective solution. And actually, the best management practice have been developing, but we need to see how we can upscale those solutions. For example, we have been seeing like a mangrove shrimps model where we can have ecological preservation, restoration, livelihood improvement, carbon emission reductions. Those have been already developed, but find very difficult to upscale. Also like the rice stream model, where you see there are a lot of benefit, adaptive very well to the saline or freshwater changes, but also very good environmental benefits because they don't use much fertilizer or pesticide, but also they can reduce, for example, carbon emissions from their practice. Also in water management, there are a lot of practice like rainwater harvesting, already developed very long ago, but people now just still like want to use surface water, and seeing that rainwater, one of the, I think, the cleanest water, they don't use much, and they don't take it into account in water management planning. Water resources planning. I think this is really a pity, but if it, and we see there are quite already a lot of problem with using groundwater, and we don't really look at is the more holistic or integrated water use. And of course, there are also some possible solution in terms of implementation, where we are now working on circular economy. So we really put like multi-objective or win-win-win situation where multiple stakeholder can involved finding the benefits. But actually, this is the principle. But of course, it's not easy because we have to work together with different people. We need to work together with different sectors, and how people really make a partnership, how the coordination, how the institutions support to coordinate or to make people really. Of course, we cannot force people to work together, but of course we need a kind of supporting legal or policy which can have make people to work together easier. Because if it's not constraints by the institutions aspect. Yeah, I think that is my second point. And the last point regarding further working on the topic, I think, of course, I think the model or the work from Philipp and Sepehr already, I think, very advanced. But of course, I think we can, there's still a lot of room for further developments, especially looking at more on more data collections or more a good monitoring system. For example, we still very hard to assess what is exactly the subsidence rate over the years here in the Mekong, because don't have really the good base station. But of course, there also we need is further for model validations. But also, like I mentioned, the social aspect I have not really yet, I think, included in the models. And of course, if we cannot develop a more holistic or true, I'm not sure, I think we cannot say true, but I think close to the reality as possible, especially the key drivers, yeah, from the social ecological system, so that the model can be improved and more reliable for decision making. So I think the next step, I think we need to really work together, not from physics or modular, but also with social science, social scientists. So I know Alexis, and I think he's very good in this, and I think that we can work together, how we can really integrate the model. And actually what I think the government, Vietnamese government, is now is needing what is the solution. Yeah, I think we know a lot about challenge, but of course the challenge or we know, but of course we need to know it further as better, but also we need urgently a solution. So I think the next step we need to also to focus. Of course, we're still working on more on understanding the reasons, but also at the same time not to forget the solution and integrating physical or social together. I think is very important. And of course, we also need more scientists who are working more on governance related, for example, how we can work, how we can share the results, not only about academy, but to governments, to other industries, how we can work with industry to reduce the land subsidence, to reduce land money. Are we able to give them the solution, because they need to work, yeah, they need to further for their business. So actually the solution we have to be transferable to different stakeholders. So how is the parity approach, how adaptive management can be implemented to support the local government? Yeah, I think it's already long from me. And
yeah, dear Kwan, the time is running short, so thank you very much for your comments. I think we can move on directly to Alexis Drogoul. I'm sure, Alexis, you have some elements on the all the issue of the social dimensions of the problem. So please, given the time, maybe maybe 5 minutes, and then we can move on to because we have a series of questions in the chat that are also very interesting. So, Alexis,
yeah, sure.
the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks a lot. So actually, Sepehr, Philipp, and Kwan, thanks very much for your presentations and comments. Actually, I think you covered something like 120% of the subject, you three. So it would be difficult for me to add something new or very interesting. So I'm not really going to speak about the social aspects of all these issues, but maybe my comments are at a kind of higher level, is to say that actually in these kind of very young and changing environments, adaptation is not something new. People in the deltas have been adapting for centuries to quite rapidly changing conditions. Okay, so here today we are examining and we have been, well, there have been an impressive display on how these conditions are and will be changing in the coming years. But actually we must not forget that adaptation is ongoing since people have been inhabiting the delta. Okay, maybe not to the same phenomena, but actually, but in fact, it is not something that will completely. Well, it's not a complete revolution for people. And among adaptation, you have technical solutions. So some of them have been displayed, and you have also other solutions. One of them, for example, which is unfortunately one of the ones probably we will witness in the future, is migration. Okay, migration is one type of adaptation to these kind of changing environments. And this is something I will come back at the end of my comments, because I think it can change a lot also the conditions and the boundary conditions of the models you have been showing. So people have learned to live in these lowland areas for centuries in changing conditions, and actually, so it's not new. The changes in land use, so I'm not an historian, but the changes in land use have happened before, and they will happen probably in the future. And for me, the question is more about what type of adaptation we are looking to implement. Okay, so it's not only because we hear a lot, and actually Kwan spoke a lot about this, which is totally normal, but we hear a lot about the necessity of implementing resilient approaches or targeting resilience of the delta. But we must be aware that actually in some conditions, in some contexts, resilience can become a deadly trap. Okay? So yes, of course, we can adapt the agriculture of the Mekong Delta, and probably there are incredible technical solutions that may let people be able to produce rice in 20 years, approximately the same way they are producing it now, with a lot more technicity probably, but still, but is it really what we want, actually? Is it really what we want, and is it really the only solution we have to let people live in this kind of environment? Okay, so it is something we have, well, it's a kind of expression I don't really like, but we really have to think out of the box that the Mekong Delta is representing today. The Mekong Delta has become in 30 years, it has changed. It has become really the place where intensive agriculture has been displayed, and the benefits of this intensive agriculture have been proven in reducing hunger and poverty. But I think should we continue like this? And this is probably something in the kind of reports that AFD is producing, that the kind of research we are going to undertake in the continuity of the GEMS project. I think we now also need to open a little bit to alternative kind of adaptations, okay? And not imagine that the Delta, well, we need to keep 20 million people living in this Delta forever. At some point, they will move. At some point, maybe the only solution will be to change completely the way we produce and the way we do things. So that was my overall comments about this. Because for me, when I'm sorry, Sepehr and Philipp, when I'm listening to you, it's completely depressing, actually, because I know the Mekong Delta and I love it. I love this place. And for me, it seems like the battle is already lost, actually. Whatever solutions we implement, the battle to keep a living Delta as we know it is already lost. So there will be another Delta, okay? It will be different, but it seems to me that it's already lost. So maybe it's not the impression you wanted to give, but actually it is the impression I got from your presentations. And the thing is, okay, shouldn't we focus our efforts on completely new adaptation pathways outside agriculture, maybe? Okay, outside the ones we know already, and if so, what kind of adaptation pathways should we follow? And I agree with Kwan that there is also a big challenge in governance here, to just remove the to just move out of the planning, which is already implemented. Actually, the agricultural planning for the Mekong Delta, which is implemented today. But so I will finish on this. Okay, so on this comment that maybe we should a little bit think about adaptation in a different way than just trying to obtain resilience of the current system. And the last point is coming back to migration. I really think that actually we all agree, and you showed it very clearly, Sepehr and Philipp. We all agree that the main problem, basically, the main cause of subsidence and a number of other problems like erosion, salinization, etc., is demography. Okay, if you remove all the people from the Delta, you won't have any, well, at least you won't have the same problems. Okay, maybe different problems, but not the same ones. So it means that at some point, demography and demographical conditions will change also the outcomes of models. And so the question on this is, do you see a way to take this into account at some point? Okay, because some people will migrate, the pressure on the environment will probably lower in some areas, okay, if people migrate out of the Delta. So do you have any ways, or have you thought about ways to take this into account at the level you are, at the scale of your models, to take this into account in the outcomes of your models? So that's it. I'm finished on it.
Thank you very much, Alexi. So we're definitely running out of time. Sepehr, I've seen on the video that I think you disagree with the fact that the delta is already doomed in a way. So I will let you react on that. We have maybe just before the general comments on the comments, we have a few technical questions in the chat that I think are worth answering. There is a first one on how actually do we monitor over extraction. I think the questions in the groundwater over extraction, I guess. Also a question for you, Sepehr, on how salinity is propagating, particular to the rivers. So maybe these can be answered in the chat if we want to keep some places for general discussion through the video. And also some questions on what are the solutions to alleviate land subsidence by reducing sand mining, and also which makes an echo to Quan comments on the fact that everything is linked, and what is the responsibility of the Vietnamese construction industry, and what is the current state of law enforcement on illegal sand mining. And yeah, we still have 10 minutes. So the Sepehr and Philipp, the floor is yours.
I can react to Alex's comments. Actually, I heard my own reaction to Alex's comments in his own statement when you mentioned that perhaps we are at a time when we have to change practices. I think that's exactly the reaction to what I was intending to say. So the picture and the image we have drawn in terms of, for instance, projections and the trends are may look doom and gloom and all bad, but this is just what if things go worse, or what if status quo, or what if we make action. So there is also a good side to that. And I try to come up to close my talk with a couple of measures and adaptation strategies as that are already starting to go on to give this hope that there can be things done. We have to address them. To react to your question, how can we influence demographic change in the models, Alexis? I briefly mentioned that it's possible if we have understanding of the demographic changes, their demands, and their import and export data. This can be partially translated into water demand and perhaps usage of resources. And that usage of resources can then be translated to whatever parameter, be it salt intrusion or land subsidence. Correct me if I'm wrong, Philipp, but I assume it's more or less around the same line. The question is, can we have a relatively reliable projection for the demographic changes? And if yes, we can potentially come up with solutions for that.
Shall I add to this then? Thanks, Sepehr. I agree. Yes. Thanks, Quan and Alexis. And I think you both called in a beautiful way for, let's say, what can be done with these models to help actually these, let's say, towards solutions and towards the future. And I think Quan mentioned these models are on delta scale, but we actually need local solutions. So, right, can they be helped by these kind of models? And of course, they can be downscaled, but I think it's important also to point out here that, I mean, a model is just a tool to understand a process and to get a grip on it in both time and space. And it's also, I think, good to realize that the level of complexity in these models that we presented today, this is a level of modeling that we don't really have for other large deltas in the world. So in that sense, the Mekong Delta is ahead of the herd. And that gives an opportunity. That gives actually the opportunity to have this kind of discussion on really, let's say, next steps. So I'm not going to go into individual solutions to reduce groundwater extraction and those things, but I mean, there are ideas, there are solutions, and yes, they can be modeled both at local scale, where they can help, let's say, policy making and really understanding the effects of certain changes, but also on the scale that Alexis pointed out, so this demographic change, and Sepehr also commented on. And I just want to, let's say, throw one thing in addition, right? If we know at some point that certain parts of a delta are becoming, let's say, inhabitable or less profitable, or you can simply, they will be lost to the sea, as we saw in examples in other deltas, then, and this is creating a way of thinking, let's say, it's called, if we know this is going to happen in several decades, maybe it's better to accept it at some point and make sure that when it happens under the conditions that are most preferable for this change to happen, and that we can steer towards, let's say, a managed retreat instead of something which is happening more as a catastrophic disaster, right? In which you lose basically everything and also your investments. So I think that is for us as a scientific community to be as accurate as possible of these changes that will happen, and then, let's say, together trying to find out what is the optimal way into the future. And a few years back, we started the discussion on managed retreat and giving up parts of the Netherlands, for example, and this created quite a fuzz also in the Netherlands, because a lot of people and a lot of wealth is actually located below sea level. But now, if we look at the projections, also this becomes really threatened by sea level rise, and people talk about maybe we should move to Germany, or we should have those kind of. This is only in the recent years that these discussions they are in the newspapers and scientists are speaking out ideas and stuff. So it's quite new, but it's a hard way, let's say, to change that way of thinking. Like Alexis also mentioned, it's an out of the box way, because you go from a delta to a different kind of delta. It's still a delta. It's probably a smaller delta in the future, but nevertheless, it can still be a very valuable area if you manage it right. That's
Thank you very much, Philip. Etienne, do you want to conclude?
Yes, thank you, Marina. Thank you again, Philippe, Sepehr, Juan, and Alexis, for this very good discussion, and also with some scenarios for adaptation, resilience, building of another delta. I think it's just, of course, the beginning of the discussion in this more policy-oriented areas. This was the second session of our Gem Vietnam webinar series. We have a new one next week, chaired by Alexis Drogul again, and Huang Chung from Cantor University. And this will try to propose some modeling options for adaptation. So we will move a little bit to the more socioeconomic side of the problematic of the Mekong Delta. So I hope we see all you all next week, same time. Thanks again. If you registered on the Google Doc, you will receive the presentations, the PowerPoints, so you can register. And yeah, that's it. So thanks again. See you next week, and have a nice day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Nice day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you
Have a
very
nice
much
day.
all.
Everyone.